Oh, howdy all, grab yourself a drink. It is time for some PathOfExile discussion. Today was the 6th day of patch 3.19 and the Lake of Kalandra expansion. As with pretty much every other day this week, there has been an emergency patch. We'll go through the details of that in a sec. But firstly, there were three main things that were addressed here. The first one was defensive Archnemesis modifiers. That hasn't gone live yet, that's going to happen tomorrow. The second one was a number of changes to the Lake of Kalandra, and the third one was a number of changes to Harvest. So let's start with the stuff that is actually live now. Firstly, in the Lake of Kalandra, basically all of the following tiles have been buffed. Breaches, there are three different types of breach tiles. They've all been buffed and sometimes in different ways. The ones that force a breach lord to appear have actually been slowed down, the expansion and contraction of the breach, in order to give you more time to kill a breach lord. One thing that's worth noting is that those Lake of Kalandra breaches are savage. The number of monsters in them is absolutely overwhelming and really, really higher than you would expect. And as a result, they are very, very, very deadly unless you're playing a build that proliferates kills extremely well. Even then, you can just get overwhelmed in the first split second after you open them. They feel like they're 10 tiers harder than the level of the zone would make you think. So that's the breaches. They've had rewards increase. There hasn't been any rebalancing of the actual encounters themselves. Secondly, essences have been changed a little bit in there. Imprisoned monsters have more chance to have additional essences there, which is both a difficulty increase and a reward increase. Next, the expedition ones have been buffed. I actually felt they were already pretty good. The number of artifacts felt like it was pretty impactful already, but that's gone up. Currency shards from harbingers have been buffed. Splinters from Legion encounters have been buffed. They were absolutely derisory beforehand, so they definitely needed that and needed it a lot. Shrine buffs have been increased in duration. This isn't really going to make much of a difference because you can't plan on which ones you're going to get, so you can't decide, oh yeah, I'm going to use different flasks because I got XYZ specific shrine buff. So it doesn't really help you very much there. It's just a little bit of a comfort thing. It's there, it's neither here nor there. The number of rats spawned in Beyond Reflections has been reduced for performance reasons. The chance to spawn a Beyond boss in these reflections has been increased to compensate. And the quantity of taint currency dropped by Beyond demons in Beyond Reflections has been increased at all difficulties. And lastly, the reflecting mists now display a little bit better. So that's the things with the Lake of Kalandra. The second things that were changed already and that are already live relate to Harvest, and these are fairly impactful in some cases and less impactful in others. Let's just have a look at some screenshots that showcase some of the new Harvest mods. You'll see here the most significant one is third place on the list. Fracture a random modifier on an item with at least 4 modifiers. That used to always be 5, locking it in place. Can't be used on influenced, synthesized, or fractured items. This is actually a buff over what existed even in 3.18, especially with this being easily tradable. And it's had its cost absolutely crushed. It's now 10,000 red life force and 1 sacred life force. This feels like it's something that was already a good deal at 50,001, and now I think this is something that is going to be widely used in Trade League and SSF alike. Ultimately though, it is going to come down to how long it's going to take you to get all those sacred life forces from Ashabi that you're going to need for this. They don't seem to be that hotly contested in trade at the moment. Maybe in SSF they're a bit harder to get your hands on. The other boss crafts have fallen in price again, but they're quite a bit weaker. Synthesize an item, and then the really weak Reforge Influence, which is just not that great, even in conjunction with meta mods. It's quite a bit worse than what existed there in 3.18 era. The prices of the Augment crafts, I don't think there were any changes to the prices of the Augment crafts, or if there were, they were pretty minimal. They are now the top crafts, not the old boss crafts. And do note that the Augment crafts are weaker than what existed last league, but then again, you probably didn't see one last league because they were so rare. Next, we have a number of the more mediocre crafts that change a stack of fragments are really bad at 500 life force each for Shaper, Elder, and Mortal fragments, and you'd never use it for sacrifice at all. This is just a really bad deal. I don't think many people are going to use them. But more impactful is randomize influence types on an influenced normal magic or rare item, as well as reforging the item with new random modifiers. This is 1,000 blue life force. I was always happy buying this in trade leagues for 20C in the past, so that is probably going to be cheaper now. We'll have to see, but if it does turn out that this is less than it cost in the past, once the prices on these blue life force settle, then it may well be that this is an extremely lucrative craft to do a lot of stuff with. Finally, we have the third screenshot I took, which just shows another few different things. Reforge Critical 150 is still reasonably good. This is good on cluster jewels. This is really strong on cluster jewels. It's also really bad on most equipment. Change the stack of essences is 30 blue per essence. This is pretty marginal. I think you might use this occasionally, but probably not very much, only with whatever essence ends up being worst, especially when you've got the Delirium Orb version. Note that this costs 30 per Delirium Orb, so if you put in a stack of 8, it's going to cost you 240. Finally, you've got the ability to change a timeless emblem to another timeless emblem for 400. This is probably going to get done a lot in order to make Mariketh emblems, because Mariketh emblems are rarer from natural drops. You probably don't roll over Templar emblems that you get doing this either, but the Vaal, Karui, and Eternal ones are much more common, and so you'll probably find a number of people will be just looking for trade sniping, looking for those common emblems, and then converting them into the more valuable ones at any time that blue life force falls below a certain point. So that's some of the harvest changes. There was a really serious bug that has been fixed where Reforge, a rare item, being more likely to receive the same modifier, actually had the description of Reforge an item less likely to receive the same modifier. And that was something that caused a lot of problems with people, because if you used one of these, you actually got the other one applied to your item. So that's now been fixed. That was a really bad bug. Additionally, these crafts were not having the level of bias that they were intended to have, although we don't know the exact numbers now. There are a couple of bug fixes, and then there were the Archnemesis changes. So let's go through these. So these changes come tomorrow, not today. Broadly speaking, they make these defensive modifiers be worth 1 map mod instead of being worth 2. So Toxic is being nerfed from 40% chaos resistance against dots down to 25%. Chaos Weaver is losing its 10% maximum chaos resistance. Now, all of the Archnemesis modifiers that allow monsters to exceed normal limits in resistances and in other sorts of defenses are being removed. Interestingly, this is a massive, massive nerf to Headhunter. So Headhunter is no longer going to be able to give you 10% to all maximum resistances once you're rolling. It's no longer going to be able to give you 10% maximum chance to attack block or spell block. And it's no longer going to make you nearly immune to elemental ailments. In short, Headhunter is a lot worse than it was in 3.18. But that said, it's probably still the best item in the game for general mapping, with Mage Blood the best item in the game for bossing. Number of other little changes that you'll see all follow this same sort of pattern. So 50% reduced effect of Scorch instead of 80%, 50% reduced effect of Lightning Ailments down from 80%. Assassin is going to be 50% reduced effect of Critical Strikes down from 70%, and so on and so forth. Incendiary is probably one of the more important ones. This no longer has 60% less duration of ignites on it. Instead, it's going to only be providing 30% fire resistance against damage over time. Various charge mods are getting nerfed, and there's a number of other things like that. Of particular note, there is a bit of a redesign of Lunaris Touched, Solaris Touched, Arakali Touched, Brine King Touched, Tukahama Touched, Aberrath Touched, and Shakira Touched. These are now going to grant a general tankiness buff rather than a specific one. So instead of Solaris granting a large fire resistance buff, it's instead going to grant 30% all ally res, 20% chaos res, 10% PDR. Innocence and Kantava get higher numbers, 40% all ally res, 25% chaos res, and 15% PDR. A particular note with these are really lucrative. I had an encounter where I killed one of these in a map. I think it was a Solaris Touched, although I'm not certain of that, and it dropped 2 Divine Orbs and an Exalt. And there was a 6-player Magic Find party that killed a monster that had a whole bunch of these in a super juiced map, and they got something like 58 Divine Orbs from one drop, and a ridiculously large number of Exalted Orbs as well. So it's worth pointing out that these things are pretty lucrative when they spawn. There doesn't seem to be any way to target farm them, so they're just like a little bonus when they do spawn in your map, but when they do spawn, you definitely want to kill them. Keep an eye out for projections over monsters' heads that look like the various gods from the Pantheon, and if you find one, definitely kill that monster. They do drop a lot of loot. Anyways, the last thing that's left here is an important note. Tomorrow we'll post an explanation on what our intentions were with the balance changes in this expansion and what went wrong with our process. We're sorry for the delay on this, it has been a bit of a week. And this is simultaneously a promise to address a lot of the criticisms that have been coming up of the way GGG have handled this league rollout, and also a very firm decision not to do it right now. So expect that there'll be a big patch tomorrow to cover, but otherwise I'm going to leave it there. May your Vaal Orbs have interesting results.